My wife humiliated me after I tried to correct my stepdaughter, saying she's not my daughter and that I shouldn't interfere in raising her. I just smiled and said, "Okay." Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. I'm telling you this story because sometimes life surprises you in ways you never expect. I'm 46, built my plumbing business from nothing, own my house outright, and thought I had life figured out. Then I met her. It was at my neighbor's barbecue last spring. I was standing by the grill, nursing a beer and making small talk about the weather when she walked in. 27, maybe 28, with tired eyes that still managed to smile. She was holding the hand of a little girl who immediately pressed herself against her mother's legs when she saw all the strangers. "This is my daughter," she said when my neighbor introduced us. The kid couldn't have been more than 6, all big brown eyes and tangled hair, peeking at me from behind her mom's jeans like I might bite. Her mom worked part-time at the local diner, my neighbor explained later. Single mother, struggling to make ends meet. The father had vanished when the kid was barely walking, sending maybe $50 here and there when guilt struck him, which wasn't often. I watched them throughout the afternoon. The little girl stayed glued to her mother's side, whispering questions that made her mom bend down and answer patiently every time. When someone offered the kid a hamburger, she looked to her mother first, as if asking permission to exist in the world. Something about that broke my heart. I've never been married, never had kids. Spent my 20s and 30s building the business, working 16-hour days, convincing myself that success would fill whatever was missing. But watching this woman try to make her daughter laugh while obviously counting every dollar in her head, I don't know. It stirred something I didn't know was there. When they were getting ready to leave, the little girl dropped her juice box. I picked it up and handed it to her, and for just a second, those huge eyes met mine. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. "You're welcome, sweetheart," I said, and her mother gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Grateful, maybe, or just surprised that someone noticed her kid was more than furniture. I found myself asking my neighbor about them the next week. Not obvious questions, just casual mentions. Turned out they lived in a cramped apartment across town, and she was working double shifts when she could get them, trying to keep food on the table and the lights on. The kid was smart as a whip, my neighbor said, already reading chapter books, asking questions that would stump adults. But shy as anything, probably from moving around so much, never knowing if the next month's rent would materialize. I started thinking about them more than I should have. About that little girl who asked permission to eat, who whispered thank you like words cost money. About her mother, who looked like she carried the weight of the world but still made time to answer every question with patience I've rarely seen. 3 weeks later, I ran into them at the grocery store. The kid was helping count items in the cart, and I could see them doing math in their heads, making sure they stayed under budget. When they saw me, the little girl still hid, but not as far this time. "How are you ladies doing?" I asked. "We're good," her mother said, but I could see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the way she was mentally calculating whether she could afford the name-brand cereal in her cart. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. 8 months of slow courtship changed everything between us. Coffee dates while her daughter was at school, family dinners where I learned to make conversation with a 7-year-old who was gradually warming up to me. I was careful, patient. This wasn't just about winning over a woman. There was a child involved, and I knew better than to rush into her carefully guarded world. Then came the call that shifted everything. I was under Mrs. Patterson's kitchen sink, fighting with a stubborn pipe fitting, when my phone rang. Unknown number, but something made me answer anyway. "Is this him?" The voice was rushed, professional. A school nurse, it turned out. "We have your daughter here in the nurse's office." My daughter? I sat up so fast I hit my head on the cabinet. "I think you have the wrong number. You're listed as her emergency contact. She fell during recess, and we can't reach her mother at work." That's when it clicked. Somehow, without telling me, she had added me to her daughter's school records. As an emergency contact, as someone who could be trusted with the most precious thing in her world. I dropped everything and drove to the school, my heart hammering the entire way. What if it was serious? What if the kid was hurt badly? What if her mother couldn't forgive me for not being fast enough? I found her in the nurse's office, sitting on the examination table with tears streaking down her face. Her knee was scraped raw, and she had dirt ground into her palms from where she'd tried to catch herself. "Hey there, sweetheart," I said softly, the way I'd learned she responded best. "I heard you took a tumble." She nodded, hiccuping back fresh tears. The nurse explained she'd tripped during tag and needed the wounds cleaned and bandaged. Nothing serious, but painful for a 7-year-old. I knelt beside the table and held out my hand. She took it without hesitation, which surprised me. Usually, she was still cautious, still testing whether I was safe. "This might sting a little," I warned as I helped the nurse clean the scrape. She squeezed my hand tight but didn't make a sound. Brave kid. As I was applying the bandage, being extra gentle around the edges, she looked at me with those enormous brown eyes and said something that stopped my world completely. "Thank you, Daddy." The word hit me like a physical blow. Daddy. Not my name, not Mom's friend, but Daddy. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like I'd earned it somehow, just by showing up when she needed someone to show up. The nurse pretended not to notice the tears in my eyes as I finished the bandaging. This kid, who'd been abandoned by the man who was supposed to protect her, had just handed me the most important title I'd ever received. "You're welcome, sweetheart," I managed to say. "Daddy's here." When her mother arrived 20 minutes later, panicked and apologetic, she found us in the hallway. Her daughter was holding my hand, chattering about how I'd made the hurt stop, how I'd bought her a juice box from the vending machine. "She called you Daddy," her mother said quietly, studying my face. "Yeah," I said. "She did. How does that make you feel?" I looked down at this little girl who'd somehow decided I was worth trusting, worth claiming, like the luckiest man alive. That night, after we got her home and settled with ice cream and cartoons, her mother and I talked for hours. About what it meant, this sudden shift, about whether I was ready for what I was walking into. "She's never called anyone that before," she told me. "Her biological father left when she was 2. She doesn't even remember him." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and meant it completely. If you'll have me, if she'll have me, I want to be her dad. For real. The next morning, the little girl climbed into my lap during breakfast and asked if I would teach her how to fix things like I did. That's when I knew this wasn't just about dating her mother anymore. This was about becoming a family. We married the week after her 8th birthday, and she insisted on having 2 jobs at the wedding. Ring bearer and flower girl, she announced, because this is about all of us becoming a family, and I need to help make it official. The ceremony was small, just close friends and her mother's sister, who flew in from Denver. But when our daughter walked down the aisle in her little white dress, carrying both rings and scattering rose petals, I swear there wasn't a dry eye in that courthouse. "Do you take this woman and her daughter to be your family?" the judge asked, going off script because our kid had whispered something in his ear beforehand. "I do," I said, looking at both of them. "And do you," he said to her, "take this man to be your new daddy, for real this time?" "I do," she said so loudly that everyone laughed, including the judge. Those next few years were everything I never knew I wanted. Saturday mornings became our sacred time, just her and me, working on projects around the house. I taught her how to hold a hammer, how to measure twice and cut once, how to read the grain in wood. She taught me that cartoons at 7 a.m. could be the best part of the week. We built a treehouse in the backyard that took 3 months to finish because she insisted on helping with every nail. We painted her bedroom together, letting her choose colors that made her mother cringe but made perfect sense to an 8-year-old girl. We fixed things that weren't broken just because she wanted to learn how they worked. "Dad, why do pipes make that noise?" she'd ask while I was replacing a faucet. "Well, sweetheart, let me show you." She absorbed everything like a sponge. Not just the mechanical stuff, but the feeling of being wanted, of belonging somewhere permanent. She'd introduce me to her friends as my dad, with a pride that made my chest tight every time. Her mother would find us in the garage on Sunday afternoons, covered in sawdust and motor oil, arguing about whether to paint the birdhouse blue or green. "You two are impossible," she'd say, but she was always smiling. We established traditions without meaning to. Thursday night pancakes. Saturday morning hardware store trips where she got to pick out one new tool for her own little toolbox. Sunday evening movies where she fell asleep between us on the couch, and I'd carry her to bed while her mother cleaned up the popcorn. She started calling me Dad without the qualifiers. Not my stepdad or Mom's husband, just Dad. At school functions, at the doctor's office, to strangers at the grocery store. I was her father in every way that mattered, and she made sure everyone knew it. The love was unconditional and complete. When I had to work late, she'd save me part of her dessert. When I was sick with the flu one winter, she made me get well cards every day until I felt better. When her class had a Bring Your Dad to Work day, she announced to everyone that her dad was the best plumber in the whole state. Her mother and I would lie in bed at night, listening to her sing herself to sleep in the next room, and feel like we'd somehow stumbled into the life we were supposed to have. "She adores you," her mother would say. "The feeling's mutual. You know she doesn't remember her biological father at all now. You're the only dad she's ever really known." It felt like a privilege and a responsibility. This kid had chosen me, trusted me with her whole heart, and I swore to myself every day that I'd never let her down. I started putting money away for her college fund when she turned 8. Nothing huge at first, just what I could spare. But as the business grew and I took on bigger jobs, I contributed more. By the time she was 10, there was enough to pay for a decent state school education. "For our girl's future," I'd tell her mother when I showed her the statements. "Our girl," she'd repeat and kiss me like I'd given her the world. Looking back now, those were the golden years. Pure and simple and perfect in their own way. I had everything I'd never thought to want. A wife who loved me, a daughter who thought I hung the moon, a home full of laughter and weekend projects and Thursday night pancakes. I should have known it couldn't last forever. The business was booming by the time she turned 9. I'd built a reputation for quality work and fair pricing, and referrals were coming in faster than I could handle them. That's when I made the decision to expand. Hire 2 guys to help with the larger jobs, and really start building something substantial. But more money meant more opportunity to invest in our daughter's future. I increased the monthly contributions to her college fund significantly. What started as $50 a month became $200, then $400 as contracts got bigger and my client base expanded. Every month I'd show her mother the statements. The balance climbing steadily. $5,000, $8,000, $12,000. By her 10th birthday, we had enough saved to cover 4 years at any state university, with money left over for living expenses. "You're amazing," her mother would say, shaking her head at the numbers. "She's so lucky to have you." But it wasn't just about the college fund. I took over everything, and I mean everything. School clothes, shoes, backpacks, electronics. When she needed glasses in 4th grade, I scheduled the appointment, sat through the exam, and let her pick out frames that cost twice what they should have because she loved the sparkly ones. Her medical insurance was through my business plan. Dental work, annual checkups, that emergency room visit when she broke her wrist skateboarding, all of it went through my coverage. I never thought twice about it. She was my daughter. This was what fathers did. When she wanted to try piano lessons, I bought a decent keyboard and paid for 6 months of instruction up front. When she got interested in art, I converted half the garage into a studio space where she could paint and draw without worrying about making a mess. When her friends all got cell phones in 5th grade, I got her the latest model, not because she needed it, but because I wanted her to feel included. My friends started commenting on it, especially the guys I'd hired. "You're spoiling that kid rotten," they'd joke. "What happens when she gets older and expects everything handed to her?" But I never saw it as spoiling her. This was my daughter. The kid who used to thank me in whispers for juice boxes, who'd called me daddy when she was scared and hurting. Every contribution to her college fund, every purchase, every expense felt like an investment in the bright future I knew she deserved. She was brilliant. Her report cards were perfect, her teachers raved about her curiosity and work ethic. She devoured books like other kids ate candy, and could explain the plot of whatever novel she was reading with more insight than most adults I knew. She's going to do incredible things, I'd tell her mother. Harvard, MIT, wherever she wants to go. The money's there. By the time she was 11, the college fund had grown to nearly $30,000. I'd projected that by the time she graduated high school, there would be enough for her to attend any university in the country without taking on debt. That felt like the greatest gift I could give her, the freedom to choose her path without financial limitations. Her mother worried sometimes that I was too generous. "You don't have to pay for everything," she'd say. "I can contribute more." "You raised an incredible daughter," I'd tell her. "Let me handle the money stuff. That's what I'm here for." And it felt true. She'd given me the gift of parenthood, of belonging to something bigger than myself. The least I could do was make sure her daughter had every advantage I could provide. Looking at the bank statements, watching the numbers grow month after month, I felt proud in a way I'd never experienced. This wasn't just about money. It was about security, about opportunity, about showing a kid who'd started life with nothing that she was valued, that someone believed in her future enough to sacrifice for it. I had no idea that within a few years, those same statements would become weapons. That the love and generosity I thought I was building would be twisted into something ugly and transactional. But that's getting ahead of the story. For now, she was still my little girl, and I was still the dad who would do anything to give her the world. High school changed everything, and I mean everything. The transformation was so sudden it gave me whiplash. One day, she was my little girl, asking me to help with her science project, excited to show me the A+ on her history paper. The next day, she was 14, and looking at me like I was something she'd stepped in. Dad disappeared from her vocabulary almost overnight. Suddenly, I was just my first name, spoken with the kind of tone you'd use for a stranger who'd overstayed their welcome. When her friends came over, I became invisible. If I tried to make conversation, she'd get that pinched look of embarrassment, like my very existence was a social catastrophe. The requests started small. Designer jeans instead of the regular ones I'd always bought. A specific brand of sneakers that cost 3 times what they should. When I'd suggest cheaper alternatives, she'd roll her eyes so hard I worried they'd fall out of her head. "Everyone at school has these," became her favorite phrase. Everyone apparently wore designer everything, carried purses that cost more than my monthly truck payment, and had fathers who understood that image was everything. The eye-rolling became constant. Ask her about homework, eye roll. Suggest family movie night, eye roll. Try to make a joke, massive eye roll accompanied by a sigh that could power wind turbines. "It's just adolescence," her mother would say when I brought up my concerns. "All teenagers go through this phase." She doesn't mean it personally, but it felt personal. This was the kid who used to save me half her cookie, who'd rush to the door when I got home from work, who'd called me the best dad in the world. Now she acted like being seen with me in public was a form of cruel and unusual punishment. The Saturday morning projects stopped. When I'd suggest working on something together, she'd look at me like I'd asked her to eat dirt. "I'm busy," she'd say, then spend the entire day on her phone, texting friends whose names I wasn't cool enough to know. Her friends were different now, too. Gone were the sweet kids who'd played in our backyard and called me Mr. Dad. These new friends looked at me with barely concealed disdain, whispering to each other when they thought I couldn't hear, giggling at private jokes that somehow always seemed to be at my expense. "Can you drop me off at the corner?" she'd ask when I offered rides to school. "I can walk from there." The corner was 3 blocks away. She was literally embarrassed to be seen getting out of my truck. Shopping became a nightmare. Everything I suggested was gross or outdated or not what normal people wear. The brands she wanted cost a fortune. But when I'd try to set reasonable limits, she'd launch into comparisons with her friends' families. "Katie's stepdad bought her the whole outfit, and he's not even her real dad," she'd say, the emphasis on real hitting like a slap. "I am your real dad," I'd remind her. "You know what I mean." But I was starting to wonder if I did know what she meant. Was I just a placeholder? A convenient source of funding until something better came along? The unconditional love that had defined our relationship for 6 years seemed to have evaporated overnight. Her mother kept making excuses. "She's trying to figure out her identity. It's normal teenage rebellion. She'll grow out of it." But privately, I started wondering if this was who she really was. And the sweet little girl had been the phase. The worst part was the public behavior. At restaurants, she'd sit as far from me as possible, earbuds in, acting like we were strangers who'd been randomly seated together. At school events, she'd pretend not to see me wave, or give me the bare minimum acknowledgement before hurrying away with her friends. I kept trying, kept offering to help with homework, to drive her places, to spend time together, but every attempt was met with barely concealed irritation, as if my desire to maintain our relationship was some kind of personal failing on my part. "She's just growing up," her mother would say. "This is what happens when kids become teenagers." But watching her laugh and joke easily with her friends, seeing her light up when she talked about her classmates' families, I started to realize that the problem wasn't adolescence. The problem was me. Somehow, I'd become the enemy in my own home. Her 16th birthday was supposed to be special. I'd been planning it for months, watching her reaction every time she saw certain cars, paying attention to her casual mentions of what she thought was cute or cool. I knew she expected a car. Hell, she'd been dropping hints since she got her learner's permit, but she was also dropping hints about what kind of car she expected, and frankly, some of her ideas were insane. Sports cars, luxury SUVs, vehicles that cost more than I'd paid for my house. So I did what I thought was responsible. I researched safety ratings, reliability scores, insurance costs. I wanted something that would keep her safe, last through college, and not break the bank. After weeks of looking, I found it. A 3-year-old sedan. Perfect maintenance records, all the safety features, reliable as sunrise. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. I spent 2 weeks detailing it myself, making sure every inch was perfect. New floor mats, air fresheners, even had the seats professionally cleaned. I tied a giant red bow to the roof and parked it in the driveway the night before her birthday, grinning like an idiot at how surprised she'd be. The party was at our house, about 15 of her friends, pizza and cake and the usual teenage chaos. I waited until the end to bring out the keys, building up the moment like they do in car commercials. "Your chariot awaits, princess," I said, dangling the keys with a flourish. The look on her face wasn't surprise. It wasn't joy. It was disgust. She followed me outside with all her friends trailing behind. Everyone excited to see what kind of car she'd gotten. When she saw the sedan sitting in our driveway, her face crumpled like I'd personally insulted her ancestors. "Are you kidding me?" she said, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "It's a great car," I started. "Excellent safety ratings and—" "It's a mom car," she interrupted. "It's what 40-year-old women drive to grocery stores." Her friends were exchanging looks, some trying to hide smirks, others looking genuinely embarrassed for her. I felt my face getting hot, but I tried to stay positive. "Let me show you the features," I said, opening the driver's door. "I don't want to see the features." She was practically yelling now. "Do you have any idea what people are going to think when they see me driving this? They're going to think your dad loves you enough to buy you a safe, reliable car," I said, my patience starting to fray. "My dad?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "My real dad would have understood what I actually wanted." The words hit me like a physical blow. Her friends had gone completely silent, everyone suddenly very interested in their shoes. Even the neighbor's dog seemed to sense the tension and stopped barking. "I am your real dad," I said quietly, "and I bought you a car that will keep you safe. You're my mother's husband," she said, each word carefully chosen to cut as deep as possible. "And you bought me something embarrassing because you're cheap and you don't understand anything about what matters." Her mother finally stepped in, but not the way I hoped. Instead of defending me or reminding her daughter about respect and gratitude, she put her arm around the girl and said, "Honey, maybe you should try to see things from his perspective. His perspective. Like I was some stranger whose feelings might be worth considering, rather than the man who'd been her father for 8 years. "I can't believe this," she said, storming back toward the house. "Everyone else gets real cars, and I get something from a senior center parking lot." The party died after that. Her friends made awkward excuses and left early, and she spent the rest of the evening locked in her room, texting furiously about her terrible, embarrassing gift. I sat in that car for an hour after everyone left, staring at the bull that was starting to come loose, thinking about all the hours I'd spent researching and shopping and cleaning, trying to find something perfect for my daughter. Later that night, her mother found me in the garage pretending to organize tools I'd already organized twice. "She'll come around," she said. "She's just disappointed. You know how teenage girls can be about appearances." "She called me her mother's husband," I said. "Not her stepfather, not her dad. Her mother's husband." "She didn't mean it." "Yeah," I said, not believing it for a second. "She did." The car sat in our driveway for 3 days before she finally agreed to drive it, and only because her mother made her. Even then, she'd park it around the corner from school and walk the last block, too embarrassed to let anyone see her getting out of it. That's when I started to understand that nothing I did would ever be enough. I wasn't her father anymore. I was just the guy who paid for things. And apparently, I wasn't even doing that right. The dinner that ended, everything happened at the local steakhouse, the kind of place where I'd been taking business clients for years. My foreman and his wife were celebrating their anniversary, and they'd invited us to join them along with another couple from the neighborhood. It should have been a nice evening. Good food, good company, casual conversation about work and family and weekend plans. I was feeling relaxed for the first time in months, actually enjoying myself, when the topic of college came up. "Our oldest starts at state in the fall," the neighbor was saying. "Thank God for in-state tuition, right? Even with scholarships, it's going to cost us a fortune." "Tell me about it," my foreman agreed. "We've been saving since our daughter was born, and we're still going to be eating ramen for 4 years. That's when I made my mistake. I felt proud, wanted to share what I'd accomplished. "We've been lucky," I said. "I've been saving since she was 8, so she's got enough for a full ride at any state school. Won't have to worry about loans or anything." The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people thinking about what I'd said, but the awkward quiet of people suddenly wondering if they'd missed something important. That's when she appeared. I don't know where she came from. One second we were having dinner. The next second she was standing beside our table like some teenage avenging angel. Her face flushed with excitement. "Did you tell them about Princeton?" she announced, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "Because I got in. Early admission." The silence at our table became complete. My foreman's wife actually put down her fork. The neighbor looked back and forth between me and her like she was watching a tennis match. "Princeton," I said, my brain struggling to catch up. "When did you apply to Princeton?" "Mom helped me with the application last fall," she said, practically glowing with triumph. "We didn't want to jinx it by telling you until we knew for sure." I looked across the restaurant to where her mother was sitting at a table with her book club friends, all of whom were now staring at our table with expressions I couldn't quite read. "Honey," I said carefully, aware that half the restaurant was listening, "Princeton costs about $60,000 a year. We haven't discussed—" "So?" she interrupted. "That's what college costs now. Everyone knows that. The state school fund we set up won't cover—" "Oh my God!" Her voice rose another octave. "Are you seriously going to lecture me about money right now? In front of everyone?" My foreman was studying his steak like it contained the secrets of the universe. His wife was making meaningful eye contact with the neighbor's wife. The whole situation was spiraling out of control, and I could feel every eye in the restaurant on us. "This isn't a lecture," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is a conversation we should have had at home, privately, before you made any commitments." "Commitments?" She laughed, but it was sharp and ugly. "The commitment is getting into an Ivy League school. The commitment is actually making something of myself instead of settling for some cheap backup plan. The state schools in this system are excellent," I said, "and they're what we planned for." "You planned for," she shot back. "Nobody asked you to plan anything. You're not even my real father." The restaurant had gone dead silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed muted. I could feel my face burning, could see our dinner companions looking anywhere but at us. "I have been your father for 8 years, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've been someone who pays for things," she said, each word carefully enunciated for maximum impact. "That doesn't make you my dad. My real dad would understand that I deserve better than state school mediocrity." That's when her mother finally intervened. But not the way I hoped. She appeared at our table, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Maybe we should discuss this at home." Then she looked at me with that expression I'd seen too often lately, the one that said I was being unreasonable, that I should understand her daughter's perspective, that somehow I was the problem. "You know," she said quietly, "maybe it's time you thought about having children of your own instead of trying to control someone else's." The words hit me like a freight train. 8 years of Saturday morning projects, of bedtime stories, of scraped knees and school plays and college funds. 8 years of being called dad, of feeling like the luckiest man alive because this incredible kid had chosen me. And in front of a room full of people, including friends and colleagues, I'd just been told that none of it had been real. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of that restaurant disaster, feeling something fundamental break inside me. The humiliation was bad enough, but it was the clarity that really destroyed me. They didn't need a father and husband. They needed a bank account with legs. The next morning, I drove to the bank before either of them woke up. The college fund that had taken 8 years to build, that had grown to $47,000, got transferred to my retirement account in 10 minutes. Just like that, her Princeton dreams became my future security. Then I went to see the lawyer. By the time they realized what was happening, the divorce papers were already filed. I came home that evening to find them both in the kitchen, her mother's face red with crying, her daughter looking like someone had stolen Christmas. "You can't be serious," her mother said before I even got through the door. "You're going to end our marriage over a teenage tantrum?" "I'm ending our marriage because I finally understand what I really am to you people," I said, setting my keys on the counter for what I knew would be the last time. "I'm a wallet. That's it." "That's not true," she protested. "We love you. You love what I provide," I corrected. "There's a difference." Her daughter was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, that familiar look of defiance on her face. But underneath it, I could see something else now. Panic. For the first time in years, she was looking at me like I mattered. "This is insane," she said. "You can't just leave because I got into a good school." "I'm not leaving because you got into Princeton," I said. "I'm leaving because last night you made it crystal clear that I'm not your father. I'm just some guy who's been paying your bills." "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I pulled out the bank statement showing the closed college fund. "And you know what? You're right. I'm not your biological father, so I'm done pretending to be." Her mother grabbed the paper, her face going white as she saw the zero balance. "You took her college money?" "I took my money back," I said. "The money I saved for my daughter's education. Since she's made it clear I'm not her father, and you've made it clear she's not my daughter, that money belongs to me. But she needs her real father to step up," I interrupted. "The one who would have understood about Princeton. Where is he? By the way, still sending those $50 guilt payments twice a year?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, her daughter spoke up, and for the first time in years, her voice was small instead of demanding. "We can't afford Princeton without that money." "That's not my problem anymore," I said. "You've spent 2 years treating me like hired help. Well, congratulations. You just fired the help." "Please," her mother said, reaching for my arm. "Don't do this. We need you." "No, you need my bank account. There's a difference, and I'm finally smart enough to see it." I went upstairs and packed while they sat in the kitchen, whispering urgently to each other. I could hear fragments of their conversation, discussions about loans, about maybe her biological father could help, about how they could fix this. When I came back downstairs with my suitcase, her daughter was crying real tears for the first time since she was 12. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean what I said about you not being my real dad." "Yeah, you did," I said gently. "And you know what? Maybe you were right. Maybe I was just playing house all these years, thinking I could buy my way into being someone's father." "That's not true," her mother said desperately. "You are her father. You raised her." "I paid her expenses," I corrected. "Apparently there's a difference, and she's old enough to understand what that difference is." I looked at this kid who'd once called me daddy, who'd held my hand when she was scared, who'd saved me half her cookies. She was 16 now, almost an adult, and she'd made her choices about who I was in her life. "Good luck with Princeton," I said. "I hope your real father comes through for you." The last thing I heard as I closed the door behind me was her mother saying, "We can fix this. We just need to figure out how to get him back. Not how to make this right. Not how to show him we love him. How to get me back, like I was a lost credit card they needed to replace." I moved into a rental house across town that night, ordered pizza, and slept better than I had in months. For the first time in years, nobody was rolling their eyes at me. Nobody was demanding designer anything. Nobody was treating me like an inconvenience in my own home. The next morning, I changed all my beneficiaries, removed them from my insurance policies, and started building a life that didn't revolve around being someone's ATM. It felt like waking up from a very expensive dream. 5 years of freedom changed everything about my life, and I mean everything in the best possible way. The business exploded once I could focus on it completely, without the constant drama at home, without the endless demands for expensive everything, without the emotional exhaustion of walking on eggshells around a teenager who hated me. I had energy I'd forgotten I possessed. I hired 2 more guys, bought a second truck, started bidding on commercial contracts. The steady income I'd been pouring into designer clothes and college funds for someone who saw me as a walking ATM, that money went into expanding the business instead. Equipment upgrades, marketing, better insurance, profit-sharing plans for my employees. By year 3, I was turning down jobs because we were booked solid 6 months out. By year 5, I owned 4 trucks, employed 8 people, and had contractors calling me instead of the other way around. I bought a house that was actually mine. Not ours, not a place where I had to ask permission to hang a picture or rearrange furniture. A real house with a workshop in the basement, a garage big enough for my truck and my motorcycle, and a backyard where I could barbecue without teenagers rolling their eyes at my cooking. The peace was incredible. No more walking into my own home wondering what mood would greet me. No more treading carefully around subjects that might trigger an explosive reaction. No more being made to feel guilty for not understanding the social dynamics of 16-year-old girls. I started doing things I'd given up during the marriage. Fishing trips with my crew on weekends, motorcycle rides along the coast. I joined a bowling league, took up woodworking as a serious hobby, even learned to play guitar, badly but with enthusiasm. The guys at work noticed the change. "You seem different, boss," my foreman said one day. "Happier." "I am happier," I said, and meant it completely. Through mutual friends, I heard updates about my ex-wife and her daughter, whether I wanted them or not. The news wasn't good. Her second marriage lasted exactly 18 months. Apparently, the new husband wasn't as willing to fund a teenager's expensive tastes as I'd been. They'd moved 3 times in 5 years, each apartment smaller than the last. No Princeton, obviously. She'd ended up at a community college for a year before dropping out. Various part-time jobs, none lasting more than a few months. The car I'd bought her had been repossessed when they couldn't make the payments. My ex-wife went through a series of boyfriends, each one promising to be the answer to their financial problems, each one lasting just long enough to figure out what he was signing up for before disappearing. "They ask about you sometimes," my neighbor mentioned during one of these unwanted updates. "Wonder how you're doing." "I'm sure they do," I said dryly. But I wasn't bitter anymore, which surprised me. The anger had faded into something closer to relief. I'd dodged a bullet. A very expensive, very emotionally damaging bullet. Instead of continuing to pour money and energy into people who saw me as a resource to be exploited, I'd invested in myself and my future. My retirement account was healthier than it had ever been. The house was paid off early. The business was generating enough passive income that I could probably sell it and retire comfortably at 55 if I wanted to. More importantly, I'd learned to recognize my own worth. I wasn't just a wallet with legs. I was a successful businessman, a good friend, a decent man who deserved respect in his own relationships. The right person would see that. The wrong people had proven they couldn't. Dating was different now, too. I was cautious about single mothers, obviously, but I'd learned to spot the warning signs early. Women who talked constantly about their financial problems, who expected expensive gifts early in the relationship, who made comments about what their ex-husbands should be paying for. I could see them coming from miles away now. The peace in my life wasn't just the absence of conflict, it was the presence of self-respect, of boundaries, of choosing relationships that added value instead of just draining resources. I'd finally learned that love wasn't supposed to be expensive. The knock came on a Tuesday evening while I was grilling dinner for one in my backyard, enjoying the kind of peaceful solitude that had become precious to me. 7 years since the divorce, and I'd gotten comfortable with the rhythm of my life. Through the front window, I could see 2 figures on my porch, and my stomach dropped before my brain even processed who they were. You know how some recognitions happen in your bones before your mind catches up? This was one of those moments. I opened the door to find them looking like refugees from their own lives. My ex-wife had gained weight and lost something in her eyes, that spark of optimism that used to make her beautiful. Her daughter, now 23, looked older than her years, worn down in a way that made me think of used cars with too many miles. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Not cruel, not welcoming, just neutral. "Can we come in?" my ex-wife asked. "We need to talk." "We can talk right here," I said, not moving from the doorway. They exchanged a look, and I could see her daughter fighting with herself. Pride warring with desperation. Desperation won. "We're in trouble," she said, the words coming out in a rush like she had to get them out before she lost courage. "Bad trouble." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. Whatever else had happened between us, I didn't take pleasure in seeing people suffer. "The car got repossessed last month," my ex-wife said. "We lost the apartment. We're staying with my sister, but she can only put us up for another week. Mom lost her job when the restaurant closed," her daughter added. "I'm working at a diner, but it's barely enough for food, let alone rent deposits and everything else." I waited. There had to be more to this story, and I wanted to hear all of it before I said anything. "Community college was too expensive," her daughter continued. "The financial aid didn't cover enough, and without—" she gestured vaguely in my direction. "Without what we used to have, we couldn't make it work." "Where's your biological father in all this?" I asked. The silence stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. Finally, my ex-wife answered. "He sends $100 at Christmas if he remembers. That's it." "So the man who would have understood about Princeton," I said, letting the words hang in the air, "isn't actually available to help with the real world?" Her daughter flinched like I'd slapped her. But I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just stating facts. "Look," my ex-wife said, "we know we screwed up. We know we took you for granted. But we're family, and—" "No," I interrupted gently. "We're not family. Your daughter made that very clear 7 years ago, and you supported her in that decision." "I was 16 and stupid," she burst out. "I didn't understand what I was saying." "You understood enough to keep saying it for 2 years," I reminded her. "You understood enough to make sure I knew exactly where I stood in your lives." They both started talking at once, overlapping apologies and explanations and promises that things would be different. But underneath it all, I could hear the same old assumptions. "We just need help getting back on our feet," my ex-wife said. "Just until we can figure things out. You could co-sign for an apartment," her daughter added. "With your credit and income, we could get something decent. Maybe help with a car down payment," my ex-wife continued. "Nothing fancy, just something reliable." And there it was. They weren't here to apologize for treating me like garbage. They weren't here because they'd realized they loved me and missed me. They were here because their ATM had walked away, and they needed it back. "You know what I'm hearing?" I said. "The same thing I heard for years, that I'm useful for providing money and credit and solutions to your problems." "That's not—" her daughter started. "That's exactly what this is," I said. "You're not here because you miss me. You're here because you need me to pay for things again." The look that passed between them told me everything. Even now, even after 7 years of consequences, they still saw me as someone who existed to solve their financial problems. "I think you should go," I said. "Please," my ex-wife said. "We have nowhere else to turn." "You have the same place you had 7 years ago," I said. "Each other. And her real father. if you can track him down. I closed the door on two people I'd once loved more than my own life, and walked back to my peaceful dinner, alone in my peaceful house, with my peaceful bank account intact. Some lessons cost $47,000 to learn, but they're worth every penny. 2 weeks after they left my doorstep empty-handed, my phone started buzzing with notifications I hadn't seen in years. Facebook tags, Instagram mentions, text messages from friends asking if I was okay. My ex-wife had launched a social media campaign that would have impressed a political operative. The post was a masterpiece of manipulation. A photo from our daughter's 10th birthday, her grinning between me and her mother, all of us looking like the perfect, happy family. The caption was pure emotional warfare. 7 years ago, this man walked out on us when we needed him most. He abandoned the daughter he claimed to love just because she got accepted to her dream school. Now we're homeless and struggling, and he won't even return our calls. Some people only love you when it's convenient. Within hours, it had dozens of shares and hundreds of comments. Friends, family members, people I barely knew weighing in with their outrage at my apparent heartlessness. How could you abandon a child you raised? That poor girl must be devastated. Men like this give fathers a bad name. My phone rang constantly. My sister called, my business partner called, even my pastor called. Everyone wanted to hear my side of the story, but the damage was already spreading faster than I could contain it. But here's what my ex-wife hadn't counted on. I'd kept everything. 8 years of marriage to someone who saw you as a walking wallet teaches you to document things. Bank statements showing every contribution to that college fund. Screenshots of text messages demanding designer clothes and expensive gifts. Photos of the car she'd rejected so publicly. Records of every tuition payment, every medical bill, every expense I'd covered. And, most importantly, I had witnesses. People who'd been there for the restaurant humiliation. Friends who'd heard her call me not her real father more times than they could count. So I made a video. Not an angry rant, not an emotional plea for sympathy. Just facts, presented calmly and clearly with documentation for every claim. I sat in my home office, looked directly into the camera, and told the truth. I spent 8 years loving a little girl who became a teenager who made it very clear I wasn't her father. I saved $47,000 for her college education. When she was accepted to an expensive school and told me publicly that her real father would have understood her needs better, I decided to take her at her word. I'm not her real father, so her real father can pay for her education. I showed the bank statements, the college fund transfers, the documentation of every expense I'd covered. I read aloud some of the text messages demanding money for clothes, cars, and various teenage luxuries. This isn't about abandoning a child, I said to the camera. This is about recognizing when you're being used as an ATM instead of being treated as a parent. Love doesn't have a price tag, but apparently mine did, and it was too expensive for people who never saw me as family in the first place. The video went viral in ways that social media campaigns rarely do, not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. Comments poured in from step-parents who'd lived similar experiences, from people who recognized the manipulation tactics, from viewers who appreciated seeing receipts instead of just emotional appeals. Finally, someone with documentation instead of just drama. Been there. Single moms who see stepfathers as paychecks are everywhere. That girl made her bed when she decided he wasn't her real father. My ex-wife tried to fight back, posting more emotional appeals, sharing older photos of our happy moments. But the damage was done. Once people saw the paper trail, saw the pattern of demands and disrespect, the narrative shifted completely. Her daughter tried to post her own response, but it was too little, too late. I was just a kid. Doesn't carry much weight when you're 23 and still expecting other people to solve your problems. The internet court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the guy who'd finally learned to value himself enough to walk away from people who didn't value him. Local news picked up the story. A radio show interviewed me about the challenges of step-parenting. Someone started a hashtag about financial boundaries in relationships. Through it all, I stayed calm, stayed factual, stayed focused on the truth instead of getting drawn into emotional arguments. I'd learned something important. When you have reality on your side, you don't need to yell. 3 years after the social media war, I was having lunch with a potential client at a restaurant downtown when I saw her through the window. She was 26 now, wearing a tired-looking uniform, carrying plates between tables with the efficient movements of someone who'd been doing the job long enough to be good at it, but not long enough to stop feeling the weight of it. The years hadn't been kind. The bright-eyed teenager who'd once demanded Princeton and designer everything had become a woman who looked like she'd learned some hard lessons about the difference between dreams and reality. I watched her work for a few minutes, struck by the strange, surreal nature of seeing someone who'd once been the center of your world reduced to a stranger serving food to other strangers. She moved with a kind of weary professionalism, smile ready for customers, shoulders carrying invisible burdens. She looked up at some point, probably feeling eyes on her, and our gazes met through the glass. The recognition was instant and mutual. She stopped mid-step, a coffee pot frozen in her hand, and for a moment neither of us moved. I could see her thinking, calculating, maybe wondering if I was going to come inside, maybe hoping I would, maybe hoping I wouldn't. The emotions crossing her face were complicated: shame, recognition, something that might have been regret. I raised my hand in a small wave. Not friendly, not hostile, just acknowledgement between two people who'd once shared a life and now shared only history. She lifted her own hand slightly, more of a nervous gesture than a real wave, and I could see her mouth form words I couldn't hear through the glass. Maybe, hello, maybe, sorry, maybe nothing at all. For a moment, I thought about going inside, about walking up to her station and asking how she was doing, maybe even sitting down for a conversation that was 10 years overdue. There were things that could be said, apologies that could be offered, maybe even some kind of closure that could be reached. But then I thought about the girl who'd once saved me half her cookies, who'd called me daddy when she was scared, who'd insisting on being both ring-bearer and flower girl at our wedding. And I thought about the teenager who'd told a restaurant full of people that I wasn't her real father, who'd rejected everything I'd tried to give her, who'd treated me like hired help for years. Both versions were real. Both versions were her. And both versions had made choices that led to this moment. Her serving coffee behind that window, me sitting safely on this side of the glass. I gave her one final nod, turned back to my client and continued the conversation about the plumbing contract we'd been discussing. By the time we finished lunch and left the restaurant, I didn't look back to see if she was still watching. Some chapters of your life deserve to stay closed. As for how everyone ended up, my ex-wife eventually found someone else willing to take on her financial problems, though I heard that marriage didn't last long either. She works retail now, still moving from apartment to apartment, still waiting for someone else to solve her problems. Her daughter is still waiting tables, still living paycheck to paycheck, still probably wondering how her life ended up so far from those Princeton dreams. I don't take pleasure in that, but I don't feel responsible for it either. Her biological father, the one who would have understood about expensive schools, never did step up. Still sends occasional guilt money, still disappoints them regularly, still gets more credit for doing nothing than I ever got for doing everything. As for me, I'm 53 now. Business is better than ever, and I sleep peacefully every night in a house where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. I eventually met someone who sees me as a partner, not an ATM, and learned what it feels like to be loved instead of used. I chose to be a father once, completely and without reservation. She chose to reject that gift. We both have to live with the consequences of our choices, but only one of us has learned to be content with the outcome. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away.